Welcome to the BXG podcast, a BXG production. My name is Brenton Beswick, the Alpha Donut guy, alongside my co-host Gregory T. Filson, and the T is for Peckerwood. Gregory, how are you this evening?
I'm doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just dealing with registrar stuff at my school, and that's obviously annoying because only the worst of the worst work in the registrar office. It doesn't matter where you're going, I feel like. So it's been fun. So yeah, other than that, somehow it's only Thursday. It's been a long week, even though it's been a short week. Doesn't make any sense. How about you, Brenton? How are you?
Worn down. And
Yeah.
like you said, this is one of those situations where, hell of a year this week's been.
Yeah.
And the fatigue is setting in. The seasonal depression is setting in. I had a book fall on my head earlier,
Wow.
but I have only myself to blame.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's always tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good joke too. But
Right. Yeah. Yep. I think
I had
oh, go ahead.
I'll I had a few hardcovers hit me at the old bookstore job
Yeah.
on a ladder. You feel like there's that little, and just that second that book hits you, it doesn't really hurt, but it's enough to like daze you, and then you're on a ladder. You're like, this is where I die, kind of moment.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
but I'm still obviously here.
Right. I think that we try to keep things pretty light here on the
Yeah.
BXG. But I think that every now and again we have to
doom and gloom.
Yeah. Excuse me, but I think every now and again we try to talk about some serious things, and
Sure.
I think that one of those things that we should probably shine a light on a little bit more seriously is moderate to severe plaque psoriasis.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And some of the leading experts suggest that Eliquis is the medication for that, although it may cause bleeding.
Good.
Which can rarely lead to death.
Yeah,
so
rarely. Which tells you that someone has died from it.
Yeah, right.
That means that someone, at least one person, has died from it. Yeah. Psoriasis is thought to be an immune system problem. Triggers include infection, stress, and cold. The most common symptom is a rash on the skin, but sometimes the rash involves the nails or joints. Treatment aims to remove scales and stop skin cells from growing so quickly. Topical ointments, light therapy, and medication can offer relief.
There you have it.
There you go.
We are not sponsored. We're not sponsored by Eliquis, but it's not for patients.
A weird sponsorship.
Who have artificial heart valves, who have APS, especially with positive triple antibody testing, who have a history of blood clots, currently have certain types of abnormal bleeding, and have had a severe allergic reaction to Eliquis. So
I like the abnormal bleeding. Is there normal bleeding?
Well,
like, this just blood that comes out of my arm every once in a while, that's a normal blood
thing. I think it's a good thing that we got leprosy cleared up,
as far as we know.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what. So I'm at a bar, right?
Okay.
And This was a while ago, and this is all observational. Of course, a leper walks in and
Sure.
takes a seat at the bar, orders a drink. Bartender comes back, gives him his drink. Bartender immediately in the trash bin besides him vomits. Okay. So the leper's feeling a little bit self-conscious, as you
Sure.
do in that scenario. And he says, "Is everything okay?" And the bartender says, "Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Can I get you something to eat?" So he orders a burger, cheeseburger, double, bacon, sauteed onions on a sesame seed bun. Bartender brings it out, serves him. Leper takes a big bite. Bartender vomits in the waste bin next to him. He says, "Are you sure everything's okay?" And he said, "Yeah, seriously, it's fine. No worries, you know." So he's finishing up his meal, calls for the check. Bartender brings the check over and he says, "Here's your check." And then the bartender promptly vomits again. And he says, "Listen, I get it. I've got a condition, but you need to show a little bit more respect." And the bartender says, "It's not you that I'm having a problem with. It's the guy sitting next to you in the yellow shirt using your arm as a chip dip."
Oh God.
Welcome to the BXG podcast. Podcast where pop culture and nerd culture meet at the nexus of the universe. Not coincidentally, I have a yellow shirt on. So there's that.
I honestly didn't know where that was going.
Right.
And I wish I didn't.
Do you know what
Oh
my
God.
favorite thing when they list all of the when it's the medicine commercial that you get oftentimes, and they list all the potential side effects, and one of the side effects is almost always a more severe version of the thing that you're trying to alleviate.
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
like take florimetol for your diarrhea. Side effects could include dysentery. That's always
That's always
a fun
thing.
one.
Yeah. I mean, I like it's, you've got, we'll say this plaque psoriasis is like a good one, but it's something that isn't horrible. It's
Right.
annoying,
Yeah.
anything annoying. And it's like, could cause heart attack or stroke.
Right. I'm
And like,
cool with just like being a little flaky.
and it's like, you know what? My skin's a little red, makes me feel uncomfortable around people.
Right.
Do I want this heart attack or stroke? I think I'll take my chances. My skin's a
Yeah.
little blotchy.
I'm a little itchy, you know. I guess we
Those aren't
shouldn't
good.
you know, shame the afflicted.
No, we shouldn't shame the afflicted. This is more on big pharma.
Big pharma.
If we're not here next week, you'll know what happened to us.
We got canceled by big
We
pharma.
got killed. We got killed.
Yeah.
By it.
Tranquilizer
Check
in the
everywhere.
back of the neck, and then cement shoes, sleeping with the
I thought it
fishes.
was just they would just let off the microchip that's in our arms from the shots.
Possibly. I have had enough boosters at this point that they could probably like just sort of draw and quarter me the way that William Wallace went out, like one in my arm, one in my other arm, both legs, decapitate me and put my head on the London Bridge.
I did 3 of the regular shots just because why not, and then 3 boosters. I'm pretty good. I got
And you're a little fella, so that'll just blow you apart.
You know what? I only had one adverse reaction.
Yeah.
Speaking on like it blowing me apart with the bomb going off, the microchip going off. Yes,
right.
But I only had one adverse reaction to it, and it's when I double teamed last year. Flew This year I
Flu,
did the
well,
double team.
and that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's what it is, because when the flu chip and the COVID chip interact, it's like trying to push together the same poles of a magnet,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's obviously where that came from.
Well, I was gonna say you kind of you led me into this. So the time I had it where I had both, and I got woozy from it was when they were
Mhm.
in both. I had one in one arm, one in the other. They're going towards my heart.
Right.
And
Yeah.
this year, the guy gave it to me in just one arm, and so they just
Mhm.
met there.
Right.
They rendezvoused just in my one arm, and I was fine.
Sure.
So, just spitting,
Yeah.
just spitting here.
Right. They tried to give me the virus. Speaking of
Right.
viruses,
Yeah.
a new television show debuted to much acclaim here in the past week, from our recording this past Sunday, and HBO's The Last of Us, starring primarily Pedro Pascal, Bella Ramsey, but also included in this episode, Gabrielle Lunas. Just pulling up a cast list here. Excuse me. I was unprepared. It's because I was looking at Eloquist. Gabrielle Luna, Merle Dandridge, Anna Torv, and Nico Parker, alongside Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey in this particular episode. Bump something. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still
Okay.
hear you.
I don't know. I bumped something in
Loud and clear.
my headset. Obviously, The Last of Us on HBO is adapted from the critically acclaimed and one of the most awarded video games of all time, 2013's The Last of Us, from Naughty Dog Studios, PlayStation exclusive. The show is co-created by one of the creators, Neil Druckmann, alongside Craig Mazin, who's probably most well known for the Chernobyl series, also on HBO. And at time of recording, Rotten Tomatoes critical review at 99%, audience score 96%. I can speak probably for the next hour on just this episode. I've played The Last of Us Part 1, as it is now known as, extensively. I've completed the game 3 times. I've gotten halfway in and got distracted a handful of other times. So I'm intimately familiar with this, but I'm curious, at this point in your life, a non-gamer, someone who gamer, a non-video game guy, but with a little bit of knowledge just based on our conversations, but what your feel for this sort of debut episode that was a little bit longer, is about an hour and 20 minutes, for The Last of Us.
Okay, so I'll go off with before I give away like what I actually thought. When you said it was an hour and 20 minutes, I replied like movie length, which I mean that's old school like comedy, like an Adam Sandler comedy movie length of a thing. And I was I would say a little skeptical of just that length of time. Even if the show's good, we've run into things where that can just be too long sometimes. So I didn't go in negatively. I was just like, ooh, this might be a little long to prepare myself. And I was like, we'll start it up and, maybe we'll have to stop it to go to bed and then finish it,
Sure.
at the other half.
Yep.
That didn't happen because it moves and the story is really compelling. It doesn't really stop either. Like that's the other thing. And I mentioned this to you, and it's different to say it probably out loud than to see it in like a text, but it reminded me of watching a video game in like the best possible way and I mean, this is when you see like the preview for a video game and
Sure.
it's like, these are not the sequences that are actually the gameplay or whatever. And you're like, wow, that looks really cool. And then you read that little disclaimer and you're like, oh, so the gameplay is going to look way worse or whatever. And this had this thing where like, oh, this like the car scene was the one that really stuck out to me. And then you sent me the next day the clips of like the stills matched with the video game and the TV show, and they're like almost dead on. I mean, it's hard; it couldn't be more dead on, really, when you do this, which I thought was really cool. I thought the show moved really quickly. I mean, I knew the storyline was going to be interesting, to say the least. It reminded me of a show like pilots are hard. They're a hard thing to do, especially, if it's a show that isn't, some like characters we know before, anything like that. And we get a lot of shows now that aren't really anything new a lot of times. They're just kind of rehashed or something. And so that can always be a struggle to introduce people. I mean, some of the best shows of all time have not good pilots. I mean, that's just the way it is sometimes.
Yep.
And then some really like some shows that fizzle have really good pilots. It just all kind of goes back. And I mentioned different things on here about really good pilots. Like a really bad pilot, Seinfeld. A really good pilot is the OC. And it's just, and this show, considering what it was doing, which is we have to take a video game and make it into something appealing to people that don't necessarily know anything about the video game, because you're on HBO, you have to hit the wider scheme of things. And I don't know how. I know that the game itself, the first one, part one, is widely considered a great game. I don't know, like, if it's a big game in the sense of like sales or things like that. I just know it's considered a good game. And this is, I didn't look this up intentionally because I wanted to have you talk about on that end of things. I thought the show was terrific. I mean, as good as you can get with this type of thing, where it's serious and it's a lot of stuff going on, but like I never lost track of anything. And I think that could have been a problem. So Pedro Pascal is just on fire right now. I mean, I mentioned that he's at a point now where he would be 15 years ago, he would be Liz Lemon love interest on 30 Rock. That's where he's at now. And it's very cool. So I think this show is really well acted too. I thought the acting was tremendous by everybody involved. He just sticks out though. There's something, it's funny how people could just kind of come along. He was in other things obviously beforehand, most notably a Sia video making out with Heidi Klum. But
yeah,
for him to really have his moment now with like Mando coming out in 2 months, and not even 2 months now, and then having this show, I mean, I don't know if anybody, and this show's getting incredible reviews, like you mentioned.
Right.
I don't know if anybody's ever been on a show at the same time. They're both, I mean, Mando's going to be awesome this season too. They're going to be so highly rated. And I just think it's awesome. So this show's great. I'm excited for more, but I'm really interested to hear what you have to say, because this is not my wheelhouse of things. This is 100% your wheelhouse.
I think for me, I'm a big fan of the weekly release appointment viewing. And after I watched the first episode of this, I was like, just give it to me all. I'll stay up all night. I will go to work tired. I'll go to work, dead. I just want this whole thing right now. And there's some fundamental changes that have been made to the show from the game that I can kind of get into. But I think that first and foremost, Pedro Pascal as Joel Miller, who is the primary protagonist of The Last of Us Part 1, is like the DNA. It's down to the DNA. And it's very impressive because in the game, he's not Latin, for one. Neither him, I mean, his brother Tommy, also played by Gabriel Luna. But I think that makes sense for the show, because in the beginning sequence, they're in Austin, they're from Texas, they're I think that makes sense to have this sort of aesthetic where the character kind of wears the face of where he's from a little bit more. The other big difference with that is his daughter, Sarah, in the game is she's little blonde hair, blue eye. And so,
Mhm.
oh, what was her name? Nico, something or other. Um, the daughter in the show was obviously of that heritage as well. But like I said, I think that makes sense. I think that some of the different shots were so on the nose. You mentioned the car scene, and that's a continuous shot, if I recall correctly from the show. And it's in the moment of the game where you're still kind of unsure what's going on. There's a little bit more lead up, and I think that was, to flesh things out a little bit, and they sort of offered these little hints throughout the way. Obviously something's going on in this other country, and there's her classmates like jittery, and then the older lady, obviously you kind of see her in the faded out background like tweaking out like that. And none of that's really in the game, but I think it was important for the show to sort of establish that sort of thing. And the car scene, I would say from the time that they got into the car to the big moment of that sequence was damn near shot for shot with the game. And we'll get into that in a minute, but flash forward 20 years to Boston, and you kind of see we get little glimpses of how things have unfolded over the last 20 years, and how people are kind of surviving, and how they're in these bigger cities, but also they're almost like militarized zones, and how they are surviving. And you get a sense from a couple of the scenes that Joel he's just done basically with humanity. And I think that that's going to be a very important theme moving forward. I'm going to attempt to dispel the notion that this is a zombie thing. And that's hard to do because of the fact that, the opening half, or, a little longer than a third, is you see this old lady in a wheelchair, and then she gets hyper aggressive and starts biting people, and that's kind of like scream zombie. And then there's through as they proceed through the rest of that sequence, people are, chowing down on each other and stuff like that. But this is a story about like a man who loses his faith in humanity and then continues to regain it. And that's why I think it's The Last of Us, right? And it's because, as you'll see in the coming episodes, the different types of undead antagonists, and I can kind of cover those as well to give, know your zombie 101. But they're almost a MacGuffin for this particular story. It's really about the people in the world, how they're getting along, and just how brutal and violent it is. And there's the scene where the woman, they're burning the dead bodies, and the woman cannot pick up the child, who there's a sequence, and that's how they kind of open up with Boston, where there's a child, he walks up to the gates, they bring him in, they hit him with the scan, and he's positive for the cordyceps virus, so they have to euthanize him, which is pretty fucked up, right? And so that's what I mean, and I said this last week when we were talking a little bit about it, is this is not a happy show. This isn't a happy game. There's not going to be a lot of moments of levity throughout. I mean, there are some. I think that they inject that at certain points throughout the game, but it's a very harrowing experience. He just tosses the kid in, right? He's just
Right. Yeah.
whatever.
Whatever.
So, and that's the thing, I think, with the game. And I know that they're going to do a part 3, but I almost want them to do something between that moment at the beginning of the outbreak and when we flash forward 20 years to Boston, because it's always kind of alluded to that Joel did really fucked up things during that period of time. And that bears fruit more so in the second game, but you can kind of see he's just, and the whole sequence where the Tess character and Robert are, negotiating, and he's, well, what about your friend? And it's like people are afraid of Joel, and it's because of, like, he just doesn't care, and he's going to survive no matter the cost. He's going to take care of what he has to take care of. So I thought that they did a good job of establishing that character. Like I said, Pedro Pascal he's just, it fits like a glove. I did have concerns leading into this about Bella Ramsey. She's a little bit too old for the part. Ellie in the first game, I think, is 13, and she's a little bit older than that. And she doesn't really have the look too much. But as they introduce the character, the biggest part about Ellie is that she has this sort of like shithead teenager attitude, and she nailed it. And it is kind of this funny, like, back and forth throughout their relationship over the course of time, how, Joel has all this old world experience, and Ellie is born 7 years into the outbreak, and so she doesn't understand a lot of that. And that'll be something to kind of keep an eye on in the future for folks that are not familiar with the game. I was a little bit surprised that they didn't end the episode with the big mid-episode twist. I thought that's where the first episode would probably cut off at.
Oh yeah.
So I was a little bit surprised that they flashed forward, but even in the flash forward scenes, they were very much, it was not necessarily shot for shot, but there are times where you can put like the still screens of the game next to the show and it is identical. And it's crazy because the game's a PS3 game. It's a late generation PS3 game, and it still holds up, like, in terms of graphical fidelity and all of that stuff. But one-to-one comparisons, I thought that they did an amazing job. I thought about it a lot the next day, and I typically don't. We watch so much now, right, for the show.
Oh
and
yeah.
even on our own, and it's like you don't carry things with you. But I love the game so much, and like I said, I've played it multiple times, and it's in my probably top 3 or 4. And the story itself is, as I've said many times, it's my favorite story. So seeing them adapt this so far, I mean, it's one episode, but I think that sign of good things to come, like, so respectfully and so carefully, and with so much love for the original product, that it's just really encouraging. And I do think that a lot of it has to do with the fact that Neil Druckmann, who was one of the 2 main creators on the game, has had such a hand in this. And I think that as we continue along this path where we're going to become very inundated with all of these game adaptations, there's Horizon coming to Netflix. Obviously, there was the Halo thing over on Paramount. God of War is coming to Amazon. I think it's important that those creative people who created these things in the first place have a voice in that. And because that will almost assure, to some extent, that the material is being accurately and carefully represented. But with all that being said, I kind of want to get into some of your thoughts regarding a couple of the different specific scenes. And I think that we can start with, the shocking death in the middle of the episode. So if you haven't watched it yet, and it's a big one, right? So if you haven't watched it yet, and you don't want to be spoiled, first of all, just pause this and go watch it. get out
Right.
of your car and go watch it. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
stop, like land the plane and watch this show. But with all that being said, we are going to get into some spoilers for the meat and potatoes of the episode. Sarah's death is what kind of catapults Joel into this life of just being numb and doing whatever he has to do to survive, regardless of how amoralistic it is, or brutal, or violent, or cutthroat, whatever have you. What was your kind of feeling leading up to that, and then when it actually occurred?
I mean, I think based on just kind of like knowing a little bit about the game, I knew it was gonna happen. I just didn't know exactly like when.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it happened, it was still like a holy shit moment, because it was
Sure.
just so boom, like, and it's super sad. And then it's kind of like he's sad, obviously, and you can kind of see it in his eyes of like, well, F this world kind of mentality. You can see that flip
Mm-hmm.
where he's trying to like be a good person, trying to, all this stuff up to this point, and then that happens, and he's like, well, screw this. To just see it visually was like it was so impactful, and it showed that it just shows you what this the game is about then, and then also what the TV show will end up being about is this guy obviously goes and turns into a different kind of person than he was beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So it
Yeah.
really impactful. I mean, it was
Yeah, I
really
mean, and that's the thing is,
intense.
it's the show's 10 years later, and so there is that sort of almost Luke, I am your father, like specter of things hanging over the whole thing, where it's like, well, I mean, Bella Ramsey's the star of this show, and we really don't
Yeah.
see this girl in many previews. So what's up with that? But I'll tell you what, when you play the game blind, not knowing anything about it beforehand,
Right.
it's an absolute gut punch. And it very much sets the stage for the rest of the show. Once we're in Boston, you kind of see, and I would say this is where there's two big differences. The difference, one big difference, and I think this was an important change that they made in the game. You can contract the cordyceps virus, which, by the way, is a real thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Neil Druckmann saw a documentary on the cordyceps in insects in an airport somewhere, and was like, that would make a really great concept for a game. And now here we are. It can be passed by being bitten, and it can be passed by breathing in the spores, because as we'll see in the next few episodes, when we get into the creatures who have been infected longer, they're very like mushroom-esque, and so they give off spores. And so in the game, the characters are constantly in gas masks, constantly. And I feel like they made the change for where it's like, however it's like touch or what have you, versus the spores, breathing in the spores, is they don't want these characters who they're paying a lot of money for, and people know Pedro Pascal's
Yeah.
face, and we already have a show where he's behind a mask 95% of the time. So I think that was probably a good change that they made. The other change was that in the show, they're really pumping this narrative that Joel's trying to get back to Tommy, and he's trying to find a car battery to get back to Tommy. And that's not the case in the game. When you come across Joel 20 years later in Boston, he's just surviving. He's a smuggler. He brings in drugs and guns into the quarantine zone around Boston. And so that was kind of an interesting take. I think that's maybe to give the character a little bit more direction, or maybe make him a little bit more likable, because there is this sense that he's just kind of this rogue, not really like a piece of shit, but like he's just kind of there. He seems
Yeah.
kind of listless before he's given this task of transporting this girl, and we conclude the episode with they are found by this security officer, military guy that Joel has like on the take or whatever. And, he's scanning them and Tess is clean and then he's clean. And then she pops up red and he's about to shoot her. And Joel just goes nuts and beats the guy to death with his bare hands. So now I guess my question would be, what's your feeling moving forward regarding her and the fact that she has been bitten but is not? Because part of the fun for me in this is like seeing what your predictions will be and like seeing
Sure.
how on the nose or how horribly wrong they are.
I mean, if she's been bitten, and it's one of those things where like I feel like you gotta do something with her eventually. Doing something mean and the old, slit the neck here, get rid of her. I feel like you have to do something. I mean, based on other ideas of how this works,
Sure.
unless it's just a thing where he can somehow be around. I don't know. It's one of those things where unless there's something I'm missing, where this can be okay for this period of time, like you would just be super super careful, I guess. But I feel like eventually it has to be one thing to it leads to one thing where she can't be alive. So that would be my guess.
Sure.
I honestly have no idea any more about this.
So before we move on, I just want to talk a little bit about some of the ancillary characters here. Marlene, played by Merle Dandridge, is the only, and this is if you watch the making of the episode after the fact, this is discussed. Only character to be recast as her original character from the game. Marlene is the leader of the Fireflies, who are a kind of anti-military movement. The military would probably refer to them as terrorists. Many people look at them as like a resistance sort of feel. Just talk to me maybe a little bit about your predictions for the Fireflies and Marlene, maybe specifically.
I mean, I'm glad I was going to say resistance. I mean, that's what it reminded me of. I entirely of the resistance. So I feel like it track very similar to that, where trying to do everything at all costs. Yeah, I feel like that, and specifically her being the leader at all cost. And I just thought that. I mean, I'm sure that was intentional to as a resistance kind of wink and nod when they did that. I mean, it definitely reminded me of that like right off the bat. So my guess is
what do you
that,
mean resistance, like from Star Wars?
Yeah.
Well, remember this
It
came
kind of,
before the resistance in Star Wars, in the sequels. This came
well,
before the sequels.
I guess it did. Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it did. I didn't realize that. So, because I didn't know when the game actually came out, to be honest. So, okay,
2013.
2013. Okay, wow. Okay, so now it reminds me of the Resistance. Now I'm starting to wonder the reverse of did they take it from the game? Okay, so, yeah, I didn't know when the game came out. Okay, cool. It reminded me that nonetheless, it did remind me of that, like the idea that and kind of shady dealings. You're not sure which side people are on too, is kind of that would it made me think of. They could be good, they could be bad, but what we don't know is what truly what the end game is.
Sure.
Because you just don't know with something like this. So that would be my thing. But I just did not know the game was I honestly thought the game was newer than that. That's cool. I mean, this is one thing I did once we knew this show came out. I just did not want to look at it.
Yeah, late gen PS3.
Okay.
The Fireflies play a big part in the series as this sort of hope, and the motto, and it's been used to promote the series, in the darkness look for the light sort of thing. And so they're an important group moving forward, we'll say that.
The other thing I'll say is I think it's always this thing about the Resistance is always looked at as good, but we've talked about it as is that necessarily true all the
Right.
time? And I think
Right.
that gets lost in the shuffle of things of like,
Mm-hmm.
we want it to be good because we have this grandiose feeling about these things that, you know, the Imperial Army is, it's just, it's
Sure.
all that kind of thing. And so there
Mm-hmm.
is, and so I say that in the same respect of, you know, in Star Wars, with that same
Right.
idea of, yes, it looks good, but we don't really know if it
Well,
is actually good or.
I think the thing that you'll learn as we move forward and you meet some of the characters outside the sphere of just these core characters is that there is no one who is good
Right,
in this
right.
world at this point. And so there's shades of gray. There are no good guys and bad guys. There's
Yeah.
just people trying to survive. And in that situation, you know, desperate people do desperate things. Um, but yeah, the Fireflies are, like I said, pretty important. The character of Tess, who is sort of Joel's maybe part-time lover, confidant, partner, she gets kind of roped into this situation in the same manner as Joel, where they are kind of they make a deal with Marlene, get her to the other side of town to our people, our squad of Fireflies, and we'll give you whatever it is that you want, car battery, guns, whatever. And so she's kind of at this point with Joel, they're partners in this. But what was your kind of feel for the Tess character?
And definitely living in the gray. I mean, I was gonna say you don't know what she's really after either. And I think, I mean, you don't know what anyone's really after, but there's definitely, for me, it feels like, I don't want to say full on backstab, but I feel like something shady is going to go down on that side. I'm just,
Mm,
I'm just guessing. Like I said,
sure,
I, I would, that just based on other things I've ever watched in my life, the
sure.
character, that character never is just in it for the good stuff. So my guess is some sort of shadiness going on.
We will see. Next episode is one of the more based on the previews is kind of a iconic portion of the game where you really run into the clickers for the first time, and those
Nice.
are the characters who are have been infected a little bit longer, and then there's even more progressions from that. So very much looking forward to it. Like I said, it's 99 on Rotten Tomatoes, critical 96 audience, um over 275 Game of the Year awards for the original The Last of Us 2013. It is the second most awarded game in the history of video games, behind only its sequel, The Last of Us Part 2, which garnered 317 Game of the Year awards. The Last of Us Part 1 has sold over 17.5 million copies. So nothing to sneeze at um, on the commercial side of things as well. And I'm also interested to see how they kind of incorporate um, the story of how Ellie gets bitten, because that is actually a side story downloadable content that was put into the game after the fact called Left Behind, and it's been shown in previews, so they're going to explore that. So I'm interested in that. But super excited. A great first episode. Can't wait for more. Expect deep dives into
Yeah.
each episode moving forward. I'd be interested to see too. I know they're planning multiple seasons of this. I'm going to be interested to see if it's going to be almost a Game of Thrones situation where the show passes where they're at with the games. I know that they haven't officially confirmed it, but we all know they're working on part 3. And I would look for this to be just a trilogy of games. So I think that the second game's double the size of the first one in terms of length. And so I feel like the second game can probably be chopped up into 2 seasons fairly easily. And then if, when and if there's a third game, that would also probably be about the same size. So I think that we'll probably look at 4 or 5 seasons of this moving
I
forward.
I looked it up. Last of Us Part 3 arrives in 2026 on PlayStation 5.
I don't know where you got that, but it's not
Forbes.
even, it's not even confirmed.
I don't know. I would say that. I would say it doesn't say it's confirmed. It's just that's what they were projecting. So
yeah. Neil Druckmann has said that there's at first he said there's an outline, and then he said, well, there's kind of a script, and then there were, all these different things, but like I said, they're working on it, and they'd be foolish not to, because the first game, we get to the end of the first season here, there is the case that could be made that this doesn't need a sequel, and then they made one because money. And the second game, kind of not really a cliffhanger, but it's very open-ended, and so I think that they're certainly going to go back to that world and try to finish this story off, but we shall see. But now we can move on after that lengthy. I don't think we've ever had a TV episode review be that long.
That was a good episode of television.
So the next thing that we're kind of moving on to is the Netflix series starring. The next thing we're moving on to is the Netflix series starring Giancarlo Esposito, and it is called Kaleidoscope. And this is a show about a heist. However, the quirk to this is that it can be watched in any order. The episodes can be watched in any order, and they're not numbered. They're color coded. And so what we decided to do was we're going to pick an order week by week to sort of watch this by. And we're going to review as we go. And so when we have this sort of framework where other people would have watched it in a different order and have a different take on things, this is the order that we're going to watch it in. And so if you want to follow along with that, we will discuss what episode that we're going to watch next at the end of this review. So the episode that you chose to lead us off here was Green.
I did.
So Green. What were your thoughts on Kaleidoscope?
Okay, so in general, with this episode, just kind of saw we have the main character in jail.
Yep.
In prison. Ray. And
or at least at this time, he's Ray.
At this time, he's Ray. So that's Giancarlo Esposito.
Yep.
And so it starts off with this, and this is before the heist.
Right. It's 7 years, I want to say.
7 years before the heist. And so he's trying to figure out a way to break out. And so I would say the setup of that was fairly clever. I had two main, I would say, struggles with this particular episode. And it doesn't, I want to watch this the whole way through. I feel like it's the only thing really, I mean, unless it's just 3 episodes deep and it's just completely awful. But I like Giancarlo Esposito. He's Gus Fring on Breaking Bad, and that's a classic character. Right. And when he shows up on other things, he's always like a really good character on those shows, or movies even. He showed up a couple things. It could just be me, but I have issues with him as the lead of a show. I don't know if he has enough pizzazz to carry a show. And the other thing is that it's this heist show, and he's supposed to be like any other time we've watched something with a heist. And I'm going to go with, I think the easiest route to go is like an Ocean's movie.
Sure.
Okay. And you have Danny Ocean, George Clooney. And I'm not going to give this comparison to George Clooney. I'm just going to give this comparison to Danny. very smart, very charming, kind of exudes this, almost so much charm that there has to be something slick. It's slick.
Mhm.
It's the
Yeah,
car
sure.
dealership. It's the car salesman.
Mhm.
You know, Danny Ocean could sell you, a 92 Toyota, any day of the week. And
Sure.
I don't necessarily get that from this episode that Ray can do that. And I feel like if you're the leader of someone that's a heist, if they're a leader of a group of people that are performing a heist, henchmen, whatever you want to call it, that would be my issue there. I'm not necessarily saying Janie didn't watch the episode, but I was telling her my thought on that, and she's like, "Well, I could watch an entire episode of Gus Fring," and it's like that may be the case. I don't know, because we haven't seen that. We've always just seen him as that side character, but at least in this episode, that was a little troubling for me. I also just thought in general that the acting was a little rough. For me, it felt, I don't want to go as far as saying robotic, but it didn't feel real enough for me to care so much about the characters yet.
Mhm.
And like they said, there's no right or wrong way to watch this show.
Right.
And I honestly picked Green because I literally said, which episode should I watch first? And I typed it in and it came up Green. That
Okay.
was literally like what happened. Uh, it's getting like, I think it's 50% on Rotten Tomatoes.
47. But there's only
47. Yeah.
32 critical reviews. There's not that
Yeah.
many
It's not really that
user.
many. It's kind of weird.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to really use that. I would just say right now I'm a little iffy. But I'm interested in what, I know the heist ends up being like a big deal thing, but I'll be interested to see where that really, really goes and how they actually perform it before I go too far into being like, because maybe he does turn it. Maybe this whole thing of him being not so much the car salesman turns into like he's the best car salesman I've ever seen or something like that. So
Sure.
I will hold judgment.
Sure.
But on this particular episode, it just, if this were just my own thing, I'd probably have been like, I'm out, honestly. But I don't mind. I don't mind watching it for the show because I think it's interesting to dissect things. And if it ends up being a thing like Blockbuster, where we write an episode
Ooh.
that was better than any other episode, then I'd be down.
Yeah.
So, but what were your thoughts?
First and foremost, I think it's an interesting concept. This
Sure.
idea of it doesn't matter what order you watch this, because I think at the end of the day, it probably does. Like there is probably a recommended viewing. Like if you wanted to make the most sense, watch it in this order. And so my thought on that, and it's interesting you picked Green because it was suggested to be the best one to start with. My thought on this is I want to go in an order that doesn't make sense. I want to go in just a completely bonkers. Like I would be fine if the next episode was the heist or was the
Sure.
end.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's just a really cool concept. And it gives me sort of that vibe of a movie like what is it called? 7 pounds or 7 ounces,
Yeah.
21 ounces?
Yeah. Something
Whatever.
like, I know what you're speaking of. Yeah.
It's like where you see like the disparate characters and they're going through their lives and eventually at the end they meet. And like, it's like, oh, well, this is how this happened. You know, you all wound up here. And so it kind of gives me that vibe, or even like something like Memento, but not nearly as like carefully crafted. I thought the episode was fine. I was entertained. This is a kind of a prison break episode. They're not working with a lot of time. I think this was about 45 minutes without credits. So it's not like they're, and I think that the other thing is that in terms of the time and maybe how they have to simplify things probably plays into the you can watch this in any order thing. Because it is, being that it's kind of like choose your own adventure, it's not like you can have an episode, just thinking recently, it's not like you can have a 3 episode run of building up to the heist in Andor, where it's like, okay, we're gonna introduce these characters, then we're gonna kind of flesh out how we're gonna do this, and then we're gonna do it. It has to be
Right.
these sort of more bite-sized kind of experiences. So I think that will probably in the long run hurt the show, because you won't have the time to develop the connection with those characters. And like the second half of this episode, where he's, or I guess like the latter third more so than the second half, but where he's trying to rebuild his relationship with his daughter, it just doesn't, like, so early. And again, I think the nature of the show and the concept of what they're shooting for, those emotional beats don't really hit the way that you probably
Right.
want them to. And maybe if you go in another order, they do. I don't know. But also the letter scene at the end where he's writing to her, and it's like, just you and me, squirrel against the world. That was a little
It was
rough.
rough.
Yeah. I think that my thing with him as the lead, I don't mind him as a lead. It's just that with the characters that he's been playing recently, you mentioned Gus Fring from Breaking Bad, but also Better Call Saul. It is the same exact character as his character in The Boys, and it is not a far cry from his character in The Mandalorian. And Moff Gideon in The Mandalorian might be a little bit more like animated in terms of how he is this sort of evil guy. But I think that kind of what holds him back is Gus Fring is such an iconic role.
Right.
And he plays these other roles recently where he's playing very much the same. And I think that, like you're saying with Danny Ocean, he is charming. He is this sort of charming pants off, sell ice to an Eskimo kind of guy. And the Giancarlo Stanton characters that he's played, that he's known for playing, that are his most popular roles, are like menacing in the scariest way of, this guy's not a big tough dude. He doesn't look like he's particularly, you know, violent or insane. It's the calm beneath the storm that makes
Yeah.
his character so scary. And I think by translating that into this guy who's like, I'm a criminal, and I got this kid and stuff. It's just like kind of a weird fit. It's almost square peg round hole to me a little bit. And I just, I think that he's an interesting actor, and it's part of the reason that I gravitated towards this show, is because I do like him. But it'll be interesting to see how he's able to, and he's like, recently he's talked about like wanting to play Professor X in the MCU.
Yeah.
And he said, I just want to play a good guy for once, because everybody knows him for being bad guys. You know what I mean? And
Right.
not just like bad guys, but like really like scary, menacing bad guys. He's just so, like, the Gus Fring character is terrifying to me. He's
Yeah.
just
Oh man.
so calm all the time. And so to see him play a character who's just outside of his box of expectations is a little bit jarring at first. But I left the episode like wanting to jump in and watch the next one. Like I said, I was entertained. It's the Netflix stink, man. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
part of what it is. It's like it's almost the reverse of HBO, where if something average goes to HBO, it's on HBO, and now it's just almost automatically a point and a half better, just because it's on HBO, and there's this prestige to it.
Yeah.
And then when you're on Netflix, it's this sort of in the opposite direction, this 1.5 reduction, because it's just got this great value kind of wish feel to it, where it's just like, this could be good with maybe like $20 more million budget and two or three more recognizable actors. And that's where I kind of feel like this is going to be in the end. when we go through it the whole way, I feel like it's going to sit in that sort of 6 to 7 range. 6 on the lower end, maybe even mid 5s, and then on the high end, probably like a 7. But it's just with the Netflix stuff, it's like it's almost there. A lot of it's almost there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it's just not. So, but like I said, I enjoyed the first episode that we watched, which again, we watched Green. So where do we go from here?
I think this is your pick now.
Let's see. My daughter's favorite color is, I want to pick a goofy order. So I don't want to just, say, so I'm actually going to look this up real quick. Like what the next episode is like in the run of the shows. Let's go with Pink.
Pink?
Yeah, Pink.
All right. Let's do it.
Yep. Pink is the next episode.
Pink.
So if you're playing at home, if you're keeping score at home, that's an E6.
If you're scoring at home, or even if you're
base.
alone.
Yeah. We have a throwing E9 and a passed ball. So I know we went a little long on the Last of Us, but this is all we have is just these two shows right now. It is this sort of time where there's not a lot going on, but business will pick up soon. But in the meantime, we will obviously enjoy The Last of Us. We will maybe enjoy Kaleidoscope.
Yeah, we don't know.
I hope so. And maybe, check out some movies here and there. But what are your media recommendations?
Media recommendations. Did I just delete them? Good job, me. I would say we were watching Wednesday. Still good. I mentioned I listened to Greta Van Fleet a couple of shows ago. I have been listening to him live now, watching YouTube or listening to him live. That's even as much as I enjoy listening to him, actually, just their albums. The live is where it's at. I mean, these guys really just rock out. So it's just so much fun. And then let's see. Sorry, I didn't realize I deleted it. I was going through stupid school stuff. And then Pressure Cooker is this show on Netflix that is like The Real World meets Top Chef. All these people live together and then they also cook. And then the judges are always like one of them. So there's no outside influence and it's all just shenanigans, which is amazing. Do love that. And Boy Genius is this just they had a new song or new songs come out today. It's like this power group. Phoebe Bridgers is one of the people in it. There's other people, I actually don't know them as well, but it's good too. It's just good, like soft rock, but it's good lyrics. So I would recommend all that. I listen to a lot more music now that I'm back doing school stuff. I noticed, like in school, grad school, because I have to do something when I'm reading 36-page essays, and that I feel like that helps. So probably a lot more music.
I can't read and do other stuff. I just can't. I
can't read like a book, but I like essays. I can listen to them. I have to.
Now, is that like written essays or is that like essays, bro?
It's written 36-page essays on pedagogy and the study of different things relevant to that. So very intense stuff that likes to repeat themselves. If you this little thing for everyone out there, just keep saying the same thing over and over again for 36 pages and you'll probably convince someone that you're right, whether you are or you're not.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that thing they did where it was I can't remember who did this. I think it might have even been one of the wine scenes. I don't know, but they like to show how ridiculous the whole like peer review scholarly paper thing is. They just wrote fucking nonsense and sent it in and they were like, oh, this is amazing. And it was like about how like dogs at the dog park that got aggressive were clearly like gay dogs and stuff like that. It was just nonsense. It was just like complete nonsense stuff, and they sent it in, and it all got published. Like all of it
Oh,
got
sure.
published. Yeah. So
It's not
that's the thing
shocking to
about
me.
scholarly journals and stuff. I mean, I had to do that when I got my master's as well, and it's just like when you're citing, when you're citing things. Well, and I even sent this to you in a text. I used to proofread our friend of the program Dallas's like papers when he was doing his grad school when we worked together. And my really well written, so on and so forth. But like my number one feedback for him always was it's a little repetitive. He said, I got a page count and I'm hitting that shit,
Yep.
basically. So
Yeah. I feel like these people are doing the same thing because it
yeah,
is,
sure.
and it's funny because like I will say, before we go to just real quick, there are some things in there that are
Mhm.
good, and you feel like you are learning something or you're seeing
Sure.
something you didn't think about. But it honestly, because of the repetitiveness of other things,
Mhm.
it gets lost in the shuffle, and I find myself doing the thing where it's like, I know this isn't actually the point. Let me scroll back and like, oh yeah, so I was right. They just have to keep saying the same thing over and over again to make up space, I guess.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I just got to get used to that. It's been a while since I had to read things like this, and so I got to get my mind frame back into it and realize that's just how this is how that works.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. This was my collegiate experience for both my undergrad and my master's. And kids listening, I don't recommend this. I don't recommend this. Okay. So for all the classes that I thought were bullshit, don't show up. And then just hope you know someone that can help you out. Teaching assistant's great if you know the teaching assistant, made in a shade.
Yeah,
I had a music class and I had going into the final exam, I had a D, and then somehow I had an A. And I'm going to tell you how. Mike Smith, if you're listening, thanks for hooking a brother up. This is a teaching assistant. And I used to play poker with him. And so that gamble paid off. And the classes that you are interested in or like are actually involved towards your actual focus area and major, just show up. You don't have to read. Listen, especially undergrad, you don't have to read because they're going to tell you everything. And then you just pay attention and remember. And when they give you those
that,
little blue books, you know what I'm talking about. Those little blue books. Did you have those?
sure.
Yeah.
No,
You didn't have the little blue books?
no,
So I took a lot of history classes. Obviously, I was, went to school to be a
sure,
history
right.
minor in history. And they would give you these little blue composition books, and the teacher or the professor was just like, write like one really big question on the board. And that was your test. And so if you show up every day and you remember things, you just write literally everything you can remember.
Sure.
And it's just because I'm going to tell you right now, I learned this from a guy who was uh a we'll call him a former penal colonist. If you can't kill him with kindness, baffle him with bullshit. And I'm going to tell you what, I did that for 2 degrees. 4.0 in my master's. If you can't kill him with kindness, baffle him with bullshit, kids.
I'll just say, as someone who went to every one of their classes except for one where I was literally like on the verge of death with the flu, my word of advice: if you're like me and you go to all your classes, don't buy the books. Though.
No. And I'll tell you
Don't
what
waste your
else.
time with that.
Tell you what else, kids. C's get degrees.
And no one cares.
No.
Nope.
Unless you're a
it's a
brain
magical.
surgeon.
Yeah, but they
Yeah.
still get degrees.
Right. But I don't want, if you had like a 2.9 GPA, I don't want you cutting my head open. I'm just
But we'll
saying.
never know. That's
Yeah,
just the thing.
that's probably fair. Media recommendations for me are I've been listening to a lot of 311. I think I mentioned that last week.
Yeah.
I've been watching this documentary on Netflix called Ancient Apocalypse. It is this guy named Graham Hancock who describes himself as an investigative journalist. And he's kind of known in the scholarly circles that we were just referring to as a pseudoscientist or a pseudo archaeologist. And he wrote a pretty like well-known book in the 90s called Fingerprints of the Gods. And so this show on Netflix, I think it's 8 episodes, they're about a half hour each, is he's traveling the world and talking to these archaeologists who are kind of outside the mainstream about the potential for an advanced civilization. When I say advanced civilization, like understand that doesn't mean that they had like computers and shit, but they had agriculture, farming at the time of hunter gatherers around the Ice Age. And he goes to these places, and it's really, really difficult to ignore the evidence he finds. Carbon dating dates these, bricks that are underneath. Because you talk a lot about like, and this is one of the things with archaeology is structures are built, but they're likely built on top of other structures. And there's a possibility that a new civilization moves in and builds their structure on top of an older civilization structure. And that's what he's kind of looking at and seeing the underneath and then even the underneath of the underneath and saying, well, to the archaeologists who are working on this site, well, how old is this? And they're like, this is like 12,000 BC. And it's interesting because, dawn of civilization, we talk about like ancient Egypt, the cradle of life, Mesopotamia, Babylon, those sort of things. I mean, we're looking at like 2000 BC or maybe 5000 BC. And so this is going way back to the Ice Age. And he links like the Great Flood. You think about Noah, right? Noah and the Ark in the Bible. But if you go around to all of these different ancient civilizations, they all have a myth in their culture or their religion about this cataclysmic flood that just enveloped the entire world. And so he's making the case that these aren't myths, they're memories. It's really freaking interesting.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and like he found, like he went on a dive with this diver down in the Caribbean where Atlantis is supposed to be, but there's actual evidence of roadways under the water that they're able to find. So, like I said, really interesting stuff. If you're into that sort of thing, I am. Like I just mentioned, went to school to be a history teacher, so this stuff kind of tickles my funny bone a little bit, gets me into that groove. But it was pretty interesting. And that's it right now for me.
Cool.
Yeah. BXG podcast productions. Every Friday at 9 a.m. on podcast services, wherever you get wherever podcasts are sold or given away for free. Apple, Spotify, etc. You can check us out over on YouTube, trailer reactions, video reviews, so on and so forth for some of the things. Most recently, History of the World Part 2, which we're very excited about, coming in March to Hulu. Mel Brooks, Mandalorian Season 3 trailer reaction, Linoleum with Jim Gaffigan, full season reviews for Willow, Chainsaw Man, among others, in just the more recent space, Glass Onion, over there on the Netflix. The Substack is up slowly. I've been meaning to do something with The Last of Us on there. Thinking about doing something with the game for the YouTube channel in conjunction with watching the show, so that could be something coming up as well. But otherwise, follow us on social media at BXG Productions, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.com/BXG Productions, YouTube.com/at BXG Productions. It's our handle over there. And otherwise, have a great January 20th.
Yeah, enjoy.
2023, the year of our Lord.
Three quarters away through this month. Man.
Yeah. Where the hell did that come from? All right. Let's get the hell out of here. Take care, friends. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.